Hey guys, I'm the Coaster Keat, and if you're one of those people that really knows me, kind of beyond the entire context of YouTube and everything, you know that this summer, seemingly out of the blue, I started designing dice boxes. And if you really, really, really know me, you might have had a hint of knowledge of this coming, because there is one of my friends out there that had one of my projects that I worked on in middle school in terms of like woodworking and scroll saw work. But for the most of you, and for anyone on this channel that doesn't really know me personally, the whole idea of making a box that kind of cropped up in that one video like all of a sudden probably seemed really random and really out of the blue. So this video is essentially to explain what the entire dice box summer was about for me. So to start, it all began with my grandfather on my mom's side, because you see, my grandfather on my mom's side was a woodworker. He would create things like this, using a scroll saw and various other tools to go ahead and create these beautiful works of art, various ornaments and things like this that I now have hanging around my room. When I was in middle school, or around there, I went up to visit my grandfather, as I kind of did on a yearly basis back then. And this time, he brought me back into his shop, and he showed me this machine, this giant machine with a little thin blade with a bunch of very fine teeth on it. And he talked about how this was how he created all those ornaments, all those really finely cut pieces of wood. And so I was curious about this, and so he decided to take the time to show me and to teach me how to use this giant scroll saw as a very, not like a very little kid, but like a kid. And he had me make like this little wooden bear out of it, like this tiny little token. And from that very basic intro to how you kind of put the wood into the machine and you work it around and you cut out the pieces that you need in order to create a form, from that very, very basic tutorial, my overachiever mind said, you know what? I'm going to make my own piece of art. And I proceeded to go home a few weeks later, knowing that my friend's birthday was coming up, and I proceeded to spend like an entire night on a scroll saw that was just kind of purchased on the side. Like, it didn't really work at all. It had so many problems. The blades kept breaking, the machine kept stopping, it was just a complete disaster. But we ended up creating this piece of art that my friend now has that was essentially this horse that was done on a scroll saw. Well, after that horrible experience with that scroll saw that I think we must have picked up on the side of the road or something, I did not have any more interest in it. The only time that I would ever think about it is when we were thinking about going back up to see my granddad, but you see, things were getting worse with him, like health-wise, and so those visits came not very often, and I don't think really at all. And so that one time with the scroll saw ended up being my main time with him. He ended up being around just long enough to show me the tools I needed to have this very random thing kind of crop up in my life. Well, anyway, time passed, and eventually so did my grandfather. He passed away and left in his wake a scroll saw. Now, this scroll saw ended up going to another family member, but because this was all happening, it reminded me of those times where we had the scroll saw, and I thought, I don't really want to do like that super intricate stuff, but I've been seeing these dice boxes recently. You see, I was watching a lot of Critical Role, and in Critical Role they have these advertisements for a company called Wormwood at the breaks, and Wormwood is a fancy dice box company, and I'm talking about hundreds of dollars for these wooden dice boxes that look relatively simple. So me, being the kind of frugal human being that I am, looked at these really, really expensive dice boxes and said, you know what? I think I could do that. I think that if I put my mind to it, I could do that. And I could use a scroll saw because, I know what a scroll saw is, I know how to use it. And I can use that and I can make my own dice box for a lot cheaper than them, and I can have it have all the features I want. So I decided to start sketching this out. This was on the road trip back from Arizona when everything was moving online in the spring. And I just kind of started sketching out this dice box. Just a very simple, it was a rectangle. It had this little section on the right-hand side that I figured was going to have enough space for some dice to sit there. And then I also figured it was going to be a pretty thick dice box, and it was going to have these little platforms. And so the original concept was that it would have these platforms with little indentations for all the dice so that you could display like 4 sets of dice on top of the thing, and then you could like open it and I guess they'd spill to the side. I didn't really think that out very much. And then you would have the rest of your dice hoard in there. But anyway, I went ahead, I sketched this out, and we ended up going, me and my parents, to some various stores and got the necessary materials. But you see, because I was starting, we had to use materials from like Michael's and places like that, Hobby Lobby, and those materials work, but they are horrible wood for a horrible price, and I would not recommend it. If you want wood, go to Lowe's. That's my recommendation if you want like a semi-fancy thing. If you want like really fancy, I can give you other references where you can get crazy stuff like Purple Heart. But at any rate, I got the wood from there, from the Hobby Lobby and the Michaels. And I ended up assembling my very first dice box, which is actually over here. And this is the one that I showed on the video. As you can see, it's got the little pocket here for dice. It's got this part. I didn't end up doing the indentations because those were too hard. But it does work. It does open up. These are hinged, and inside are a bunch of dice. I also ended up putting this nice velvet lining on it that you might have seen, and that lining just makes it classier. But you know, this box, right, this set the foundation because it has all the gluing, all the joints, it has hinges, it has the whole idea of fabric, and it has stain. Now this stain job is horrific. Like you can probably see if you've ever done stain before, like just a horribly done stain, like practically slapped on. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought it was paint. And so that was my first dice box. But then after that, I started sketching, right? And here's the thing about me. When I was in high school, and when I was in my economics class, in which the teacher had a very great skill at kind of talking in such a way that you would just fall asleep in his class like pretty much every time, I had to find a way to stay awake. This was the only class in my life I ever fell asleep in, by the way. And so what I would do is I would draw all of these geometrical shapes, and I would create little patterns, and that sort of concept is what led to the next box. Now this is the original sketch for the whole octagon idea, and essentially it started out as it was a box, and then I cut the corners, and then I just kind of went crazy from there. And this concept has a lot of things that didn't end up in the ultimate box, but it ultimately turned into something that was real. It took a lot of effort. It took a lot of sketching and diagramming. It went from, you know, this diagram, which doesn't have any numbers, to a diagram with a few more numbers, various measurements and stuff. And then eventually it got to the point where I literally mapped out every single piece of this box onto the pieces of wood, cut them out, sanded them, finished them, assembled them, and created the box that you see before you. And this uses not only the various techniques that I used for the other box, but it also improves upon it because you might have seen there's leather on this box now, a little bit of detailing, and it actually has a lid that fits on, and the lid itself here, logo is totally not stolen, I don't know what you're talking about, was actually wood burning. And so just this huge escalation. From a very simple thing to a very complicated thing in a very short period of time, and it was a blast. It was so fun just kind of diagramming this out, like using that little bit of a engineer side of my brain, finally using that stuff that I learned in geometry in freshman year for something. It helped, you know, it wasn't, I could have done it without it, but it definitely saved me a lot of time. And it just ended up being something that helped me spend the time and the days, and it was something that didn't require a lot of work from me, and it was a good pastime. And you know, now that I'm back here in Arizona and I no longer have access to all of the various crazy tools that I used to do this, you see, once I started doing things more seriously, we went from having just a scroll saw to pulling out this old miter saw that we had, this giant thing with like a huge spinning blade that you can just kind of change the angle of, and then we could pull out a table saw that we had, and before you knew it, now it's like I took a full-on course in woodworking, how much I know now about all of this random stuff. But all of that knowledge is kind of on hold for now, because for now, it's back to college, back to making videos, back to talking to you guys, and I personally wouldn't have it any other way. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video, even if it was a little bit rambly at times. But I hope that you all also find a hobby that you enjoy. Quarantine's a great time for that, as you probably know. But anyways, talked long enough. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope that you all soar high and enjoy your ride of life. Bye!